Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. Today I'm here again with Yen Porter. Welcome, Yen.
Hi, thanks.
Um, and so, Yen, we talked a little bit before I hit record about what we're going to be working on, but for the benefit of the YouTube viewers, can you recap what we want to look at today?
That's right. So I am a boot camp student at Turing. It's like a 7 month long program for those who don't know. And I was just wondering if I could go over maybe some of the codes, some of the things that I've learned throughout my time at my boot camp. And you, Jason, could just give me some tips about where I can improve, things that I can focus on as I'm getting ready to go out and try to become a Rails developer in the real world.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let me change the settings so you're able to share your screen.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and share.
Yeah, sure. I just want to figure out which one I want to share first, but
Mm-hmm.
I'll share my screen. These are a bunch of things. This one is a side project that I've been kind of working on, but we can maybe start with even some of my backend API building.
Mm-hmm.
This is currently a project that I'm working on right now. So in the last part of my boot camp, one thing that we're doing is the bootcamp has a front end program and a back end program. I'm in the back end Ruby on Rails program,
Mm-hmm.
and we are getting together with the front end JavaScript React guys, and we're building an application that we just kind of come up with on our own. And this project that I'm working is called Ringworm Relief. Um,
Sorry, what's it called?
the ringworm relief has to do with if your pet gets ringworm, I guess it's a huge ordeal that's pretty stressful because you have to, the fungus or whatever it is that infects the pet is around for a long time.
Mm.
And it can be really stressful to keep your house clean, to give them their medication and things like that. So that's the point, is that you're supposed to keep track of those things. And
Okay.
we have different endpoints. The point was I would make the endpoints for handling the users, the authentication, the login, as well as the user's calendar. I have a couple other teammates who are doing maybe the pets and their ringworm status and
Okay. And
their
sorry, I just have to ask, where did this idea
yeah.
come from?
So we call it our capstone project, and everyone kind of pitches an idea, and then we kind of vote. There's a bunch of different projects going on right now, and this was the one that was pitched to us, and we just kind of threw in our votes. And let me see if I can even pick up. I'm going to open up my Slack and just kind of show up his little pitch board that he had for us.
Okay,
It
so
just
one of
kind
the
of,
other students
yeah, he pitched
apparently
it.
had
He
some
went,
familiarity with ringworm related
yes,
stuff.
that's right. And so that's kind of where we were going with it. He had a really stressful time with his ringworm. And this was our Miro board where we were just kind of creating the flow and the authentication of everything. Here was our MVP, if you can see this well
Mm-hmm.
enough. So we just finished our 2 week sprint that we had. Um, and we learned quite a bit. We decided to break up the backend into microservices. And
Mm-hmm.
this was our first experience. We've experienced doing a true microservice. And that's when I realized, as I was digging into creating the users and the calendars, and how, because it's a microservice, it's going to be split up so that, and with the authentication to the front end with the tokens and things like that, that's when I realized, like, oh, there's something called an API gateway that we should probably use. But we were so far into our project that we just kind of said, okay, well, since I'm taking care of the users and the authentication sending to the front end, I would just kind of, for now, be a sort of mini API gateway that's probably not the best practice out in the real world. Um, but so that's where we were at. And these
Okay.
were just, if you want a direction for me to lead you in, let me know.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, are there any specific parts that you're interested in feedback on?
Yeah, maybe since we are focusing on testing, I know the last time we talked, you said when you're doing testing, you want to test for maybe the results right? Not maybe focus less on what you get as a view and more of what you want your application to be doing. I forget the way that you worded it, if you
Yeah, I think that's a
remember.
pretty fair way of characterizing it.
Right. And so I actually implemented the devise gem here to do most of the authentication for me.
Hmm.
But starting with my testing, I started with, let's see, this is a session. So this is a user registration. So I tested and I've never worked with any of the context scenario that I've seen that you've done. And maybe you can give me some insight into which one is better for which situation.
Hmm.
Um, so I start with describing letting you know which kind of request it is, describing the success, and then what the success should do and what you will get back. And then I have the failure within the type of request that it is right here.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, just some terminology. Maybe this is a review for you, but
Mhm.
um the 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 its those are called examples, and then describe and context. Those blocks are called example groups.
Okay.
And describe and context are are functionally identical. Like in the RSpec library, like they're literally the same code, they're just aliased. And so the
Okay.
choice
Sounds good.
between describe and context is just like a purely semantic one. Like it's whichever one makes more sense to the human reader.
Okay.
Yeah, and I view it as kind of an arbitrary, kind of a subjective judgment call. It's like, do I feel like describe makes more sense or context makes more sense? I think I use describe when I'm like, I want to say like, I'm describing this thing, like on line 6 here, we're describing a post request.
Right.
But then on line 7, excuse me, I might say context success because it's like, this is the context that we're wanting to describe in this example group. But again, it's
Okay.
subjective. There's nothing wrong with
More
using
of semantics.
either
I
one.
see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So zooming out a bit and like thinking about this file as a whole, I see that it's called user registration requests spec. Okay. And I see that it's in the requests folder. Okay. And I see the title says user registration request. Okay. Um, and I kind of already noticed describe post request and describe success. Okay, the first thing I'm noticing is when I look at this first test case, this success case, because there's so much stuff there, it's hard for me to tell at a glance what the test is about.
Mm.
Um, can you scroll down for me just so I
Yeah.
can see the entire it block here? Okay, yeah, there's just a little bit more. Okay. So now that I've made that first observation that it's a little tough to tell what the test is about just by glancing at it, now I'll take
Mhm.
a closer look at it. So, oh, sorry, can you scroll up just a little bit?
Yep. Oh, there we
Okay,
go.
thanks. Um, okay, so we're getting a user count and we expect it to be
Mhm.
0. We're setting some user params. We're making a post request. We expect the response to be successful. Status 201, user count to be 1. Okay. Then we're grabbing the last user and we're expecting certain things to be true of this user.
Mhm.
And then we're expecting a certain response body. Okay, interesting. Um, I think there's maybe I could suggest a few things to improve this test if you're open to it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Um, so there's sometimes a question that comes up of Is it okay to have more than one assertion per test, or should we stick to just one assertion per test? The way I
Mm.
view it is it's not about one assertion per test or more than one assertion per test. The question is, how many things is this test about? Is this test about one thing or is it about more than one thing? Because if a test is about just one thing, it's easier to understand than if it's about more than one thing.
Hmm.
And I think maybe this test right now is about more than one thing, and we could split it up into individual tests that are each only about one thing. So let's see. One thing that sticks out to me is the assertion that it creates a new user. So here's what I might suggest just as we're talking in.
Hmm.
Maybe let's leave this test totally intact. Um, but let's copy and paste some things. Like, can you take that top
Sure.
it on line 8 and just copy and
Hmm.
paste it above, like on the just on the line right above it?
Yep, right here like that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then maybe we can change that to it creates a user. Yeah. And then we can say, okay, I'm gonna say it. I'm
Yeah.
gonna say it and don't type anything yet because I'm just saying it in English, and then I'll give you the syntax if you don't know it.
Sure.
So we want to say expect post request to increase the user count by 1. So
And the it
here's,
block word
uh
that's in the assertion.
sorry, say it again.
I'm sorry. So you're saying that's what would go within the it block, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
So maybe first let's copy line 27, that post request there, and put it
Right.
in our new test case. Yeah. Okay. And then on the line above post, we can do expect and then an opening brace.
Expect. So that's where I would probably go user.all to be 0 is what I'm assuming because I currently have, for this test case at least, I would have 0 users in my database.
Okay. So I think, are you using GitHub Copilot?
No, I am not.
Okay. Well, somehow an autocomplete appeared to have happened where,
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my shortcut. I'm sorry.
oh, I see. Okay.
It's my snippet that I made.
I see. Okay. So what we actually want is instead of parentheses, we just want an opening brace there.
Oh, an opening brace. Okay, yeah,
Hmm.
I've never done this sort of expect before.
Okay. Yeah. And then we'll close the brace after the post.
Okay, so you want the post within here,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you and I talked a bit about Ruby blocks. We had a conversation about some kind of like
Yes, we did.
nitty-gritty Ruby stuff. And
Hmm.
so maybe you remember that any Ruby method can take either it can take data as an argument or it can take a block,
Correct.
meaning we're giving it behavior as an argument.
That's right.
And so when we give when we do this syntax right here, we're passing a block to expect.
Okay. You're
And we can
passing a
come
block
back in a
here.
second and talk about how exactly this works, but I think it'll make more sense after we add the next thing we're going to add. Um, so right after that closing brace, we can do dot two space change, and then another opening brace. And here we'll put user dot count.
I see.
And then at the end, after the closing brace, we'll put dot by, which is a method, and to the by method, we will pass 1.
Oh, I see. think I just in my Stack Overflow searches, I've seen something like this where you have the second curly braces and you go dot by one.
Yeah, so you can see when we call the change method, we're passing it a block also.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what I assume happens under the hood is when this test executes, it first takes that block that you gave change and it evaluates user.count and
Mm-hmm.
it'll get 0. And
Right.
then it'll evaluate the block that you passed to expect. And then it'll go back and evaluate the block you gave change again, and it'll be 1.
Right.
And then
Mm-hmm.
since the 1 matches the 1 in the by, the test will pass.
I see. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're basically passing blocks to be tested.
Yeah, it's like
Correct. Yeah.
is one block is the value that we're evaluating, and then
Correct.
the other block is the action that we're taking, which we expect to change our value that we're evaluating.
Okay. That's very cool. I
Yeah.
think throughout our time, at least, we've just kept it simple the way that we've learned. So yeah, that's very neat. I think
Mm-hmm.
that probably works a lot better than counting a user and then going through and doing all of these.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing like here we could have done expect user.count to equal 0 and then
Mm-hmm.
done the post and then expect user.count to equal 1, but this syntax is arguably a bit more elegant or it's arguably more
Right.
confusing. That's a subjective decision, but I personally prefer this syntax.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, do we want to give this a spin and see what happens?
Yeah, sure. API one. Okay. User params. A failure on my line 8.
Okay. Yeah, do you
Oh,
see
yes.
the
We
issue?
did not define my, yeah, we didn't define my parameters.
Mm-hmm.
So could I probably at this point maybe just even define my parameters underneath my post request, you would say, or would you just list it within the it block?
That's a great question. And this touches on a really important issue. And in
Mm-hmm.
my consulting work, when I help people clean up their tests, this is something that comes
Mm-hmm.
up a lot. Um, we could indeed pull the user params assignment up to the top, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
we should, but also maybe we shouldn't. There's a problem that I see quite a lot, which is that there will be a test, and the test will be, maybe hundreds of lines long, like a lot of different test cases inside the test. And people have taken all of the data that's needed for all the tests, and they kind of merge all that data and put it at the top.
Right.
And then the data at the top might be a mixture of stuff that's needed for every single test in the file, stuff that's
Mm-hmm.
needed for like one test, stuff that's needed for like 3 tests, but it's
Right.
all merged together in this like one single clump.
Right.
And
All
it
the way
makes
at
it
the
really,
top.
yeah, and it makes it really confusing because
Yeah.
it's like, okay, what's needed for what? You can't be sure what you're able to safely change and stuff like that. And it creates a big
Mm-hmm.
problem. So I think the approach that I would take is like I would just put user params in this individual test for starters. And
Mm-hmm.
then maybe once we feel like we're done with the test, then we can say, okay, what's common among all the tests? And let's pull
Right.
that up to the top.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I've actually in the beginning done it where I put everything at the top and then as I go through, it's just kind of like, wait, what was I having again? And then I have to scroll up and look at it. And I found that highly annoying. So that's where I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, maybe I'll just try putting it within the block. So that does make sense where you would first write it and then it's more of like going back and refactoring it, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
and organizing it in a better way.
Exactly.
Okay. And then we can run it again. I
Yeah.
think, yep, the only thing we're missing should be the user parameters. We've got the header up top. Right.
Okay. Okay. Now here is a subtle but important point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have two scenarios here, at least. At least I saw two.
Mm-hmm.
Success and failure.
Right.
Um, that is a reference to kind of the result as opposed to the scenario. And the scenario is something subtly different, which is like when we send a valid request versus when we send a problematic request.
Right.
And so I would
So,
suggest we change success to valid request or something like that.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So when we have a valid request, it creates a user. Great. Um, Now what other test cases do we have here? Expect response to be successful.
Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, we have expect response to be successful and expect response dot status to equal 201. I'm actually not sure what expect response to be successful checks specifically. Do you know?
I know that it'll check maybe the body that you get back and make sure that it is successful because I don't know specifically, and sometimes they'll give us it'll be like, expect this to be truthy, but it's falsy, if that makes sense. They'll check the
Okay.
response and they'll expect it to be truthy versus falsy.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think what's missing from this is is an obvious what's missing is an obvious statement of what it means exactly for the response to be successful. And maybe it's up to me as you know, maybe it's just incumbent on me as a programmer to know the tools and to know what expect response to be successful means.
Mhm.
Or maybe the obligation is on the test writer to make it more clear. I'm not sure what my opinion is on that. First, can we just like look at some docs or something and see exactly what
Sure,
expect response to be successful means?
sure.
Okay.
Where would we find this assertion for our spec testing? I
Well,
mean, I
do you
could just Google.
use
I don't know if there's a
ChatGPT?
specific. Yeah, I do. I
Okay.
actually find it really helpful in explaining things to me.
Yeah, that's where I would go for this.
Okay, sure. Let me see. Do I have one open? Yep. Okay. So then we would just, what would be the prompt that you would ask? What does, I would say, what does to be successful actually test for an RSpec?
All right. Okay, HTTP status codes. I think this is a case of it giving more information that's one that what the more information than what's necessary, and the extra
Right.
info actually obscures the answer. Like, is it doing anything more than testing the response code? I can't tell.
Mm. It seems like it does, it's testing that the range is within 200 and 299.
Okay. Okay. So if that's what expect response to be successful does, then
I
line
guess it.
44 and 45 are, of course, redundant, and we don't need both.
Well, I think the reason we would test for the specific code is because if it's a creation, then we want a 201 response. Whereas if we just checked if it was successful, we don't know which code it is that we're returning.
Right. Yeah. And also, I find the 201 check a lot clearer because,
Right.
again, like as we just saw, I didn't know what to be successful meant.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think we should just have the one. Okay, so now we can have another test case. Maybe we can put it above this one where it says it gives a 201 response.
Okay. And then I would probably, we would have the post request. So what you're saying is you would just break these down to the sort of more individual type, make which would in make it clearer what each test is testing for.
Yeah, it'll make it clear what each test is testing for. And if and when one of these tests fails, it'll be
Hmm.
more abundantly clear what's going wrong.
Right, which part is failing. Okay, yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Okay. Now if we go a little further down that test, what's the next topic we touch on in the test?
We were checking that the email that if the response is matching the actual user in the database.
Yeah, interesting. Hmm. Let me think. I'm just trying to think, like, is this something is this something that's actually worth testing? Maybe it is, maybe
Right.
it's not. Can you show me the controller for this? Is this like just a device
Sure.
controller or is this something custom?
It should be a device controller.
Okay.
Yeah, registrations controller.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably wouldn't test those return values. The reason being, um, it's extremely unlikely that those tests will fail, for one, and like that code isn't even ours. Um, like, okay, this is another topic that comes up a lot. People say
Okay.
like don't test the framework. And you could also it's basically the same thing to say like don't test libraries.
Mm,
And along with that comes a statement that sounds good, but I think is really mistaken. People say just trust that Rails works. But and in this case, trust that devise works. But it's not that we're
Mm.
trusting that it works. We shouldn't trust that it works. Um, we're assuming that it works. And it's not that we should be trusting that it works. It's that if it stops working, there's nothing we can do about it. Um, I've said before that tests are executable specifications.
Mhm.
And so test-driven development is kind of about coming up with the specifications for our application and then making executable specifications and then writing the code that meets those specifications. And it doesn't really make sense to apply that idea to somebody else's code. Like, why would we make specifications that match what the library already does and then make executable specifications and assert that they match the library's behavior? It it doesn't make a lot of sense, I don't think. And so for those reasons, I think I probably would not include these tests.
Okay. So then we would probably get rid of these.
Yeah, and the body test too, because same reasoning. And then that last one, honestly, who cares about that? It's not really, doesn't really have any, it's really immaterial to the stuff we care about.
I mean, wouldn't I expect there to be the authorization? Are you saying this is probably already even covered with the device gem?
Um, my thinking, and let me know if you think I'm mistaken, is just
Sure.
like, who cares? Like, what we care about is whether a user gets created and we get a 201 response. This authorization header, like, that doesn't really matter. Like, if a user gets created, but we don't get this header for some reason, like, who cares? That's my thinking. But again, let me know if you think I'm wrong about that.
I mean, this test, I feel like for this test case specifically, I want to, it's not just making a valid user. I want to make sure that when the front end makes this request, that they get a bearer token back so that they can authenticate the user.
Okay. Okay, I was missing that piece of it. Um, okay, yes, when we make a valid request, it hmm. Okay. Yeah, all right. I think maybe what we want here is just a clearer description
Right.
that communicates the higher level meaning. Okay, creates a user with an authentication token. And the authentication token is used by the client to authenticate. Um, maybe we can say, okay, so maybe it's not exactly that it sends an authentication token, it's that it returns, hmm, well, I guess this is, yeah, it returns a token. I think maybe the way I would word it is that it returns a token, returns an authentication token that the client can use, or returns an authentication token for the client. Just so it spells out why we're returning an authentication token. Like, why does that matter?
Mm, okay. So you're
Yeah.
saying it returns an authentication token for the for the Y part, would we, I mean, continue Y? It returns an, I'm just trying to understand where the Y part is. It returns an authentication token for the client. That seems to be the statement to me.
Well, to me, it's the what is returns an authentication token, and then the why is for the client. But obviously, this is your test,
Mm,
and so if there's a different way of wording the why or like a different part of the why that makes more sense to
okay,
you, obviously you can change that to make it better for you.
right. No, okay, I understand. So the what is returning an authentication token. Why are we returning it? We're returning it for the client.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then I suppose if we're making this test all about, yeah, exactly. Okay. And have we run this one since we changed it?
We have not.
Okay. Okay. Now, Yen, I'll let you go to the failure scenario,
Sure.
and based on the stuff we just talked about, maybe you can take a swing at improving this test.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know we up top tested for the response, and so that's where I would probably delete this since it's already testing for the failure codes, and we just
Mm-hmm.
keep it at the 400 right here.
Okay.
And then we would break this part down. I don't know that we're keeping this one just as a 400 request. So within that 400 request for fail, I mean, maybe I would even have another block here that says that describes the 400 block and everything that goes on within that 400 block.
Okay.
Oh, is
Um,
that breaking it down too much?
I don't know. Honestly, I'm actually a little lost. Um,
Oh, sorry.
oh, that's okay. I think it's my fault, not yours. Um, the thing that I'm getting distracted by is the scenario itself. So remember, we changed the scenario and the other one from success to
Oh,
valid
right.
request. And then the
I'm sorry.
question that
So,
arises in my mind is exactly how is this request invalid?
okay. So I think, so yeah, okay. So these ones I'm saying why here. And I guess this one would be for a 400 request. It's if there are things that are missing, if there are things within the body that are missing.
Okay.
So, from my validation from my model. So say first name's missing or last name's missing.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, so I don't know if this is what you meant when you were talking about breaking it up even more, but
mm,
if you want to add another level of nesting where you say like describe invalid requests,
mm,
describe or context or whatever when first name is missing, I think that could be a good way to break it up.
okay. Just, and then I would probably just do here, it returns a 400 bad request.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just copy these. So then will I go ahead and just test for every scenario of when the last name's missing, like going through and testing every part of the validation that's missing?
Good question. I wouldn't. So another like high level principle, I think a lot of people think about testing in terms of the right way and the wrong way and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But I don't think it's kind of ironic, but I think thinking of testing in terms of right and wrong is not the right way to think about it. Um, I think the right way to think about testing is in terms of costs and benefits.
Mm,
I'll just pause so you can catch up with your notes.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, we could write tests individually for first name, last name, and email, and arguably that would be more thorough than checking just one. But there's like
Hmm.
diminishing returns. Like
Right.
it's a lot more valuable to test one of them than zero of them, but it's not much more valuable to test two of them than just one of them.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why I would do one where it's like just first name is missing or all the attributes are missing or something. Like it doesn't really matter what, it just matters that we're sending params that don't make a valid user.
Hmm. I'm just trying to think of that in the overall testing field. Um, I mean, I'm just wondering if I should call the I don't know if this is the right way to even think of it because I'm still trying to wrap my head around the way you're thinking in the way that maybe it makes more sense as a tester.
Hmm.
Um, I'm just wondering if we should flip it so that the context is when you're getting a bad request, because I feel like when you're just testing that the first name is missing, it doesn't encompass the fact that the code that I want represents that it's an invalid uh, when they're sending in their parameters that the parameters are invalid. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm not explaining it correctly.
No, let me repeat my understanding of what you said and you can tell me if I'm understanding it right or not.
Sure.
Um, Maybe you think that like if the first name is missing, that's kind of an
Hmm.
incidental detail, but what's essential is that we're sending an invalid request and it
Correct.
it imposes a little bit of a mental burden and maybe even misleading if we speak in terms of the first name missing because saying the first name is missing the higher level meaning that it's an invalid request.
Right. Yes, correct.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not sure exactly what to do about that. Um, um, here's how I would approach it, I think.
Hmm.
I almost always find it easier to start with an imperfect test and then modify it to be better than to come up with something good right from the start.
Mm.
And right now we have syntax that obviously wouldn't run. So maybe we can just get this test on line 75 to the point where it'll run, and then we
Mhm.
can clean it up.
Okay. And then this will not have a block. I would just comment this out for now, including the end. That's all right.
Okay. Yeah, tell me how you feel about this. For the context on line
Uh,
70. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, no, yeah. For the context on line 75, when first name is missing, it returns 400 bad requests. Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
maybe we could say when required fields are missing.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah. Yes, I like that a lot better.
Great. Okay. Okay.
I
I
think
guess we
here,
can, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna just kind of continue on.
Yeah. Yeah, and side note, I think we can figure out a better way to do this user param setup, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to distract us with that just yet because I think that's kind of a more minor improvement that's more appropriate to make at the end. Okay, yeah, what is next?
Since I'm testing in the context of when required fields are missing, I would put another block here where maybe this one I tested the first name, and this one I would probably just do an email. But what did you call it? You called the it block and
It
assertion?
is an example.
An example. Okay, I'll just make a note here. Okay, so the example here would be um, it returns an error message with, and this is going to be wordy for now,
Yeah.
with information about what is missing.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, Yen, I often write my test cases by just saying, I literally say it works, and then I write the test, and then once I have the
Mm,
test in place, I'll go back and fill in the description because
right.
I personally find it so hard to come up with a description before I write the test. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm in like coding mode, and so it's
Hmm.
easy for me to, I'm like thinking in terms of code, and so I'll write the code. And then once the code is there, it's easier for me to like switch into human language mode.
Right.
But at the
Yeah.
beginning, it's like so hard for me to come up with it. So I just like give myself permission to not come up with a good description. And then
Right.
I come back and do it at the end.
So, out of curiosity, just for your way of doing things, do you write all of your tests first before you touch any code?
No, I do them one at a time.
Okay. Okay. Just making sure because it seemed like I guess maybe just because we're working backwards, it seemed to be maybe you wrote and all of your specifications first before you went and touched the code.
Um, okay, so this is a finer point, but I'll kind of touch on that. So when I'm writing tests, I almost always write just one at a time. Sometimes like two
Hmm.
at a time because maybe sometimes there's like, well, in this case, there's like success and failure, like
Right.
they're two parts of the whole. But I'm not going to go and like write 10 test cases,
Hmm.
partly because like I don't want to have 10 failing tests because that's just like really distracting. I want to be focused on one thing at a time. Having
Right.
said that, that doesn't mean that I haven't thought of most of the specifications beforehand. Like
Mm.
I very well may have a just a text file or a physical piece of paper where I write down my
Mhm.
specifications, and then I'll take my document and one by one I'll translate my specifications to working tests.
Right. Yeah, I find that's how I usually do it as well.
Okay. Well, you're doing better than 90% of professional developers. Because at a lot of places, it's just kind of seat of the pants. They have a vague idea, and this is, I'm not laying the blame entirely at the feet of the developers. A lot of times, it's the
Mhm.
managers too. The managers give a really vague assignment, and the developers take that vague idea and they start building something immediately without first
Right.
deciding what they're going to build, which is crazy, but it's how most places operate.
Yeah, I think I probably just have an upper hand just because of the way that my boot camp is run, where they focus on, hey, before you start a project, let's see your MVP, let's see this, let's see your JSON contract and things like that, to where we do have to think about those things before we dive in. I find that when I do kind of just go off on my own and do a project on my own, then that structure that I have maybe can be less structured, if that makes sense. Is where, like, you're talking about how you're in a team, you're getting your job, you're given a job, and you just want to dive in and start going. It's You have to take that step back and just be like, okay, hold on, let's take it slow, take it steady, you know, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like you're starting with a really healthy way of approaching it. So that's great.
Just real quick, because we're almost been finished up, and I just wish I had more time, so I'll just have to make
Uh-huh.
more time to have these appointments with you, Jason.
Yeah.
Um, so we were talking about the user params and kind of deciding where it would go. It's a little bit minor. Um, and maybe as I scroll on, I mean, I suppose these would stay within, because I'm going to want to change these. Like for this one, I tested that the first name was missing. This one, I'll probably test something else that's missing. Um, so I think these are unique to their own it block. Would you maybe agree with that?
Well, remember the comment about diminishing returns,
Right.
how I'd probably test the case where something's missing that makes it invalid, but I
Mhm.
probably wouldn't hit all the different scenarios under which it could be invalid.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. It was just because it's within the required fields are missing, is that I'm like, I don't need to test them all, but let's just go ahead and do it. So you're saying maybe just because um, it's okay here to just kind of, in your terms of diminishing returns, it's okay to probably just copy this and place it up here so that we're using all of the same user params.
Well, let me ask this because I'm not sure that I understand the background of the question.
Mm,
I see your description here. It returns an error message with information about what is missing. Um,
mm,
so it seems like the first test is about the 400 response, and the second test
mm.
is about the error message. Do I have that part right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know, maybe I would even take user params, and instead of having it once per test, I would pull it up just one level, so we're
Right.
specifying it once. Because if we
Within the.
have it twice here,
Mhm.
it makes me wonder, like, hang on, are these identical or are they different? So if we
Right.
define
Right.
it only once, then it's obvious that they're identical.
Mhm.
So I think
Yeah.
that's probably how I'd handle that.
So you put it up here within the context.
Yeah.
And I think we touched on this and talked about it before as well, where I was asking you early on about the let blocks.
Hmm.
Would you do a before do, and just refresh my memory because it's been a while. Would you do the before do, or would you do the let?
I would do a let.
Okay.
Um, I have a whole blog post about this, but it's not, this is like a subjective thing and it doesn't matter a ton. Like you can use let or you can use instance
Hmm.
variables. I prefer let, and my reasons are pretty weak. I'm like 60/40 on let versus instance variables. So I don't think there's necessarily a lot wrong with using instance variables. I just prefer to use let. Again, it's kind of a subjective thing.
Right.
What I
And I
will
like your
say,
blog posts, by the way.
what's that?
I said, and I like and appreciate your blog posts,
Oh,
by the
thank
way.
you.
Sometimes I find myself going back. I don't have too much time, but sometimes I'm doing something and I'm like, let me see what Jason said.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your appreciation. Um, okay, the other thing on let is I always use the bang version of let instead of the not bang version. Do you know the difference between those two by chance?
I kind of read up on this and I actually read about the debate between the bang and the not bang. And let me see if it's, I think, and we even talked about the bang versus not bang, but it's kind of jumbled now. So what I have in my mind right now about the difference between a bang and a not bang is when you, if you don't have the bang, then it only happens when you first call it. If you have the bang, then where it's declared here, it already exists. Is that correct? Or
Exactly.
okay.
So I believe you and I talked about it, Yen, but just
Yeah.
in case anybody is not familiar with how this works, you would think that let defines a variable, but that's not what happens. Let
Mhm.
actually dynamically defines a a memoized method. And so this method, when you use the non-bang version of let, the method only gets called the first time that you reference it.
Mhm.
Whereas with the when you use the bang version, it gets invoked immediately. And I've seen cases where people use the non-bang version of let to like control execution flow and stuff, and things are all out of order, and it's just like super confusing to try to follow the execution path. And so I use the
Mm.
bang version of let just because the bang version can do everything the not bang version can. It's just that the only thing the non-bang version brings to the table is the the possibility of confusion. There's like, in my mind, there's like no benefit to it, only downsides. So that's why I always use the bang version.
Remember, I even read a blog post about the argument of um, why you shouldn't always use the bang version. But
Oh, interesting.
I, yeah, and so that's pretty funny. But I mean, I feel like it's pretty much doing the same thing. I think I may have even encountered once where I didn't use the bang version, and there was something because it got invoked when you call it versus having already established it.
Okay.
Um, so I can see how that can get confusing. Okay, so we'll even have them. We'll have it as the bang. It's here. Great. Okay. I mean, would you even go through the effort of saying this is the of calling it an invalid user params? Because I know earlier I do have
Oh
this
yeah.
user params that are valid, just to be more descriptive and to be a bit less confusing.
Good question. Let's think about that. Can you scroll down a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to close my window because it just started to rain.
Oh,
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't know if there's more in this test that you wanted to clean up, but it feels like maybe this is a pretty decent stopping point.
yeah, I agree.
Okay. Okay. And by the way, Yen, for our next session, you might already know this, but I changed my meetup schedule. I was doing sessions like every single day, which
I
was
did
kind of
see that.
crazy. Yeah. And so now I went back to just doing them on Wednesdays and Sundays.
Okay.
So
Sure.
when you use that link that you have and you only see Wednesdays and Sundays now, that's why.
All right. Yeah, I was really impressed when I saw your schedule. I was like, wow, every day. That's that's a bit exhausting.
Yeah, I bit off more than I could chew.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much, Jason, for, I mean, first of all, even taking the time to offer this mentor session and just being willing to go through and help me through all of this as I try to get better at my testing and writing the
Yeah,
correct
you're very
assertions.
welcome. And this helps me just as much as it helps you because it keeps me in touch with the kinds of questions people have. It helps me have some content to put out there. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you doing this also. And I look forward to our next session.
Great. All right. Thank you, Jason.
All right, thank you. Talk to you later.
Bye.